Hello, welcome back to the channel. It is Dan Nocturne Knives coming at you today with a quick first impressions video of this knife, the Beyond EDC TM Riverwolf. So Beyond EDC is a Chinese brand maker, something like that. They're manufacturing this knife, which is designed by John Demko of Demko Knives. You might know him as someone who's designed a lot for Cold Steel, and then recently he's kind of started his own production brand, he's been making knives for a while, but now he's got production knives like the AD 20.5, and he's been very famous for the AD 20 and some other ones like that, the AD 10 and so on. I have this knife in through the Apex Pass Around group. Thank you very much to those guys, and I've had it for a few days now, ready to give some first impressions along before I send it off to the next person. So with all that said, let's get into it. So I'll give you a breakdown on this knife. It is TM Terramundi is kind of the sub-brand that this is, and the model is called the Riverwolf. It is made in China. For materials, we have M390 on the blade with a stonewash, and then titanium handles, also stonewashed with frame lock here, milled tie clip, and then a tie backspacer. Take a look at some dimensions here. This knife is coming in at about 8 3/4 inches overall. The blade length is coming in about 3 3/4 or so, and the cutting edge length is right at 3.5. Take a look at some specs here. Handle thickness, a little on the thick side at 0.51. That's actually not insanely thick. Blade stock is coming in at 0.15, definitely thick on the stock. Behind the edge thickness coming in about 22 thousandths or so. Yeah, 22 thousandths right behind the edge. So definitely a big knife. I don't have my scale on hand, but I'll put the weight on screen. I'm gonna guess it's something like 5.5 ounces, approximately. Pretty heavy, to be sure. Yeah, and there's no internal milling on this. It's just 2 handle slabs. So let's talk about my likes, neutrals, and dislikes for this knife. So first, on the likes, I like the materials. M390, when done well, is a solid steel. Titanium makes a great handle material. It's strong, it's lightweight. Milled titanium pocket clip, solid tie back spacer. I like the materials. Next, I really like the finishing on this knife. I love this nice heavy stonewash on the handles. I think it looks really good, and it's going to hide wear really well. You won't be getting many snail trails on this. And I like the stonewash on the blade. It's a good kind of coarseness, moderately heavy stonewash, but you can still see some of these grind lines moderately well. I have one little blade finishing issue that we'll get to, but it's not too big a deal. I'll talk about that later. My next like is the action on this, at least on the closing. It's very nice. It's super falsetty, as you can see. Blade falls straight into the handle, which is not surprising considering how large and heavy this knife is, but it is quite satisfying in that way. My next like is the blade on this. It's a solid blade. It's pretty thick, but honestly, it's not insanely thick, especially considering the height of this blade. It's very tall, and with this nice long grind, it gets down to a not bad thickness behind the edge. You can see out of the tip, surprisingly thin and precise for such a large, thick knife, coming in just over 20 thousandths. And that's with a decently wide edge bevel. I'm going to guess this is probably at about 19 or 20 degrees per side, the edge bevel. So pretty happy with the blade. It's big, thick knife, but it'll cut pretty decently. I put this through some cardboard. You can see some tape schmutz on there. But in putting it through some cardboard, it's actually pretty nice to use. It's not bad for slicing things. My next like are the ergonomics. For my hand, at least, they're quite good. Very good ergonomics. You can see there's a big chamfer that runs all the way around this handle. You get some nice soft corners with that, and it's even chamfered here on the inside of the scales. So no sharp edges. I'm impressed with that. Even around this area, everything is chamfered, no sharp edges here. Usually I don't like finger grooves, but for some reason on this knife, they just work. They really work quite well. I think it's because John Demko is very good at designing for ergonomics most of the time. So your fingers are going to fall into these grooves if they're at all size like mine are. These two fingers go back here just before this hook, and in a saber grip, it falls into your hand really nicely. This rounded part on the back lines up with the curve in your hand right there, and you get into a very comfortable saber grip here. Hammer grip is pretty similar. Usually I find that finger grooves get in the way during a hammer grip, but this knife is done quite well in that they don't. It feels very comfortable. This part right here sinks into your hand and kind of fills it out. Very comfortable there. Great hammer grip. You can choke up here as well with this finger choil and get a lot of control, and that's also very ergonomic. And then the pinch grip is even pretty good. You kind of want to hold it back here. Your index finger and kind of this knuckle will fall into this depression right here. Very comfortable here. You could definitely put in a lot of pressure easily, get some push cuts like that if you're cutting rope onto a table or food, something like that. My next like is how simple the construction on this knife is. I haven't taken apart, but you can see here how there are really only 2 screws. Yeah, there are only 2 screws that are holding this knife together. You have the pivot, and then you have this body screw. The clip screws, you won't be able to see it, but it only screws into this lock side scale. There's no screw on this side, it's only a female receptor for this screw. And the pivot screw, and I believe they're both T8, so your disassembly should be very easy, just 2 screws to pop apart. But even with only those 2 screws, it feels really, really rock solid. My next like overall is the quality on this thing. It feels very well made. Centering is dead on. There is absolutely no up and down play, nothing left or right. And then the action is like that. And it's nothing super nice. Very well made. The finishing is nice, except for in one little area that I'll touch on. But the quality here, you can really feel how it's solid. It's a very well made knife. My next like on this is going to be this finger choil in particular. I think it's very well done in that it's nice and big and usable, but you don't lose much cutting edge. You can see even without the choil, you would maybe get this much more cutting edge before you're underneath the handle. So you're losing, what, a 1/4 inch or less of cutting edge for a nice full-size choil that gives you a lot of control up here on this big blade. I think that's definitely a worthy trade-off. I like the way that's been done. And then my last like is the access to the lock bar. I think it's been designed very well. You can see how the lock bar is just proud of the show side scale. It has a nice little chamfer right here to make access easier, and it's very easy to push over with your thumb and release it. And then along with that is how easy the blade is to close. You put your finger here in a normal position. You let the flipper fall onto your thumb, and it falls closed just like that. There's no double clutch. The detent is soon enough. Here's where it's on the detent. Here's where it's off. So you put your thumb there in a very normal, natural way, and it will be past the detent ball every time. I've never personally had a double clutch issue with this. Very easy. And those are my likes. Now on to my neutrals. And really my only neutral in this is how wide it is. It's a very, very wide knife. You can see how much the blade is sticking out of the handle here when it's closed and how wide the handle is itself. So you put this thing in your pocket and it's kind of a pocket hog. Now, of course, that kind of comes with the territory of a knife that's this large. It's something you're definitely going to understand getting into it. But it is a thing. Is it a huge deal for me? No, not usually. But sometimes you do want something slimmer and easier to carry. So maybe it'll be a deal for you, maybe it won't. It's not a huge deal for me as is, but just something to note. And that's it. Now on to some dislikes. Now my first dislike for this is that it's not milled on the handle. I don't know why. I'm not sure if you'll be able to actually see it, but it's completely unmilled in there. Totally flat slabs of titanium. Here's where the balance is. You can see the balance is actually pretty decent, right about where your first finger is going in this grip. So it doesn't feel unbalanced, but they could go ahead and shave a 1/4 ounce, 1/2 ounce off that overall weight if they just did a little bit of internal milling on this handle. Not sure why they didn't. And at the price point that this is coming in at, I think that'd be totally fair. to expect that. My next dislike is the clip. It carries pretty shallow. You can see here, you got it in your pocket. You're going to have about this much sticking out of your pocket. Pretty big section of the knife, pretty bulky section. You're very obviously carrying a knife in your pocket when you put this thing in your pocket. I wish this clip was pushed up all the way to the back, and it would carry just a little bit more subtly like that. I would prefer that. My next dislike on this knife is this hook back here. I'm not a fan of knives that have a hook at the end of the handle because it limits the room you have ergonomically. Now, I said I like the ergos. They fit my hand very well, but this hook is going to be limiting. If you have bigger hands than mine, which I wear a medium to large size glove, I'm on the high end of medium, small side of large. If you have bigger hands than that, you're definitely going to be running out of room on this handle because you have this hook here. You can see how I wrap my fingers around, very little room back here. If I just spread my fingers out a little bit, I'm onto that hook. I wish that were pushed farther back, or it were just straight off the end of the handle and it didn't have that hook there. And if you're using this with gloves on, you'd definitely probably be up like this onto the hook with hand size similar to mine. And then my last two likes are kind of related. So the first one is one finishing issue. The stonewash is very nice, except for when you get into the plunge grind area. You can see the look of the finish changes back there. Changes because the media wasn't quite able to get fully back into the plunge grind. You can see how it's just a little shiny. The finish changes there. So that is an error in the finishing and in the stonewashing. And then my kind of related issue is with the choil here and the plunge grind itself. You can see how the plunge grind is hitting the edge right at the back. You can see we're not clear of the plunge grind just by a little bit. So as you sharpen this knife, you're going to get a smile back here. And if you're not careful, you might get a little bit of recurve. But you will have this edge bevel expanding as you sharpen it all the way back to the heel. And if you can see here, there's actually a very, very slight recurve already just from the factory edge. You can see the heel right here, just jutting up above the rest of the edge. That's a consequence of this choil not being big enough or the plunge grind being slightly swoopy. They make this a sharper angle and you'd have no issues. The choil would be perfect, but as it is, you have the edge hitting that plunge grind. Oh, and then another dislike is the detent on this. I don't love the detent on this. It's soft. It's just pretty soft. Very easy to fail, this detent. I think it needs to be definitely snappier. You can see how easy it is to fail. Right there. Now, that is remedied with how this flipper is designed. It's so high up that when you grab it and pull straight down, you have so much leverage and you get so much range of interaction. You interact with the flipper all the way from here to down here. And because of that, you're pressing on the blade till it's nearly halfway out of the handle and it only has a very short distance to go to be opened. That remedies the detent being overly light. But I think it would be better to have a stronger, snappier detent, and then there are no issues there whatsoever. You can definitely fail this knife. It's very easy to deploy, but it would be a more satisfying action if the detent were snappier. Alright, and those are all my thoughts about this knife. I would love to hear what you think about this one. Have you been looking at this knife? Did you pick one up? Did you decide to pass on it? Go drop your thoughts in the comments down below. And while you're down there, don't forget to hit that like button and that subscribe button if you like knives, sharpening content, all that kind of stuff. I would definitely appreciate it. And with all that said, thank you very much for watching, and I'll catch you on the next one.